They spoke again, as they always did. Words came like wind across a still lake, sometimes gentle, sometimes sharp, but always persistent. And he listened, not because he agreed, not because he wanted to reply, but because he had learned slowly that the first act of understanding often begins in silence. Did he feel the pull to answer? Yes. Every fiber of him wanted to speak, to correct, to explain. And yet, in that moment, he found himself still. It is strange, he thought, how the world assumes that silence is empty, how quickly they mistake quiet for weakness. But in truth, silence can be full of thoughts, full of noticing, full of the subtle rhythms of the heart. He felt the weight of their words pressing against him, yet he did not move. He did not respond. He simply breathed and allowed the space between what was said and what could be said to stretch. And in that space, he began to notice something he had rarely paid attention to before: the echo of his own mind. How easily we forget the sound of our own breathing when the world insists on speaking. He remembered the first time he tried to hold his tongue, really hold it, and how unnatural it had felt. Every instinct screamed to defend, to explain, to react. But instinct is not always wisdom. And in those early moments of conscious stillness, he discovered the strange, almost unsettling truth. He was capable of holding space for himself without needing their approval. Their voices ebbed and flowed, sometimes rising with force, sometimes soft and insinuating. He could have let their tone move him like a tide, but he did not. Instead, he watched the way the words landed, like stones tossed into a pond. Some made ripples, some sank silently, and some disappeared before they even reached him. Could he let go of the ripples they caused? He began to think he could. Slowly, he realized that listening without answering was not absence. It was presence in a deeper way. It was in this stillness that he first felt the stirrings of inner power. Not the kind that shouts or dominates, but the kind that moves quietly, like roots growing unseen beneath the soil. How strange it was, he thought. That power could feel so gentle. He did not need to raise his voice to hold his ground. He did not need to argue to claim his truth. He simply needed to remain, to be present to himself, and to let the world speak around him without breaking his own calm. And yet there was discomfort. Oh, there was always discomfort. To remain silent while they pushed to restrain the urge to answer felt unnatural at times. It was a tug at the chest, a flutter in the throat, a quiet tension in the shoulders. But he learned that discomfort was not the enemy. It was a guide. It reminded him that the old ways, reacting, defending, proving, were not the only ways to live. There was a choice. There was a path that wound inward, away from the noise and into a space that was his alone. He noticed the small things that came alive in silence, the rise and fall of his own heartbeat, the subtle shift in the air as they spoke, the way the mind tries to fill empty spaces with imagined arguments, imagined victories, imagined losses, and he did not chase these thoughts. He let them drift like clouds across a quiet sky, and in the drifting he felt something he had not known before, a quiet confidence that did not rely on their recognition. Do they ever wonder what it feels like to simply be without answering every call, without meeting every challenge with words? He wondered that often. Sometimes it seemed almost miraculous that one could exist in the world, surrounded by voices that demanded attention, and yet remain whole, not untouched, not unfeeling, but steady, unshaken by the insistence of others. He realized that this was the first step towards something larger, not loud, not grand, not celebrated, but quietly true. He did not know then what it would become. He did not know how the small acts of silence would grow into something that changed the way he moved through life. He only knew that in the stillness there was clarity. In the pause between their words and his own, there was a space where he could breathe, where he could notice, where he could meet himself fully. And for now, that was enough. He listened. He breathed. He remained. And in the quiet, he began to feel the faint, gentle weight of his own strength, the kind that does not boast, does not seek, does not demand, the kind that waits, patient, timeless, and quietly unstoppable. He began to notice the quiet stirring within himself. At first, it was almost imperceptible, like a shadow moving at the edge of vision, a restlessness that asked him why he felt so drawn to reply, so tempted to break the calm with words. It was uncomfortable, this stillness he had chosen. The silence that once felt protective now pressed gently against his chest as if asking him to look deeper. Why do we feel the need to answer so quickly, he wondered. Why does the world expect our voices to rise before our thoughts have settled? In the quiet, he felt the subtle tremor of impatience. Not from them, not from outside, but from himself. He wanted to speak, to explain, to set things right. And yet, he resisted. Slowly, he realized that every impulse to react carried a weight he had not always noticed. Each response had consequences, ripples that reached farther than the words themselves. Could he afford to move so quickly? Could he trust that the silence itself held value? I read. It was strange, he thought, how the body remembers what the mind tries to forget. His hands twitched, his jaw tightened, his chest rose with shallow breaths, as if urging him to act. But he breathed more deeply, letting the rise and fall of his own lungs become a metronome for patience. There was a rhythm in restraint. He discovered a quiet pulse that steadied the heart and softened the edges of unrest. What if strength was not in action, but in holding still? Time stretched in this stillness, unhurried and patient. He noticed the small, often ignored details. The way the air felt cooler when he paused. The way the light shifted slightly in the quiet room. The subtle way his thoughts slowed and separated from the noise outside. In this slowing, he felt a strange liberation. For the first time, he could observe himself observing. He could watch the tension rise and fall like the tide, and he could choose not to be carried away. And yet the silence was not always comforting. Sometimes It brought shadows he did not expect. Doubts crept in, small, whispering questions about whether he was wrong, whether he was weak, whether the world would move on without him noticing. But he did not chase the shadows. He let them sit beside him, like uninvited guests who might speak but could not compel him to act. And in that letting go, he began to notice the strength that had always been there, quietly, waiting. He thought about the times he had reacted too quickly, the words that had left marks he could not erase, the moments when Rah had led him to speak more than he had intended. Could he learn from that? Could he let the memory of past impulses guide him, not in fear, but in awareness? Each hesitation, each deliberate pause became a lesson. Each moment of silence was a teacher, showing him that control was not the same as suppression, and that patience was not emptiness, but a quiet kind of wisdom. Sometimes they spoke louder, their voices demanding a response, their tone carrying the weight of expectation. And still, he did not move. He felt the old pull in his chest, the subtle insistence that he must answer, that he must defend, that he must defend, that he must justify himself. But he noticed it, simply noticed it, and in noticing, the power of the impulse began to fade. Was he afraid of them? Perhaps. But he was more afraid of losing himself to reaction, and in that fear, he found clarity. He began to understand that silence was not absence, it was a choice. A way of being fully present without giving power to the noise. In holding still, he felt the rise of something quiet and steady inside, a strength not visible to the world, not applauded or acknowledged, but real and enduring. Could he trust this strength? Could he let it guide him through the pressure and the provocation? Slowly, the answer came. Yes. And in this trust, he felt a gentle peace settle over him. The discomfort did not vanish, but it softened like a stone, smoothed by years of water. Each breath became a small anchor. Each heartbeat a reminder that he was not lost in the world of others, but rooted in himself. The urge to speak, to act, to respond was still there, but it no longer ruled him. He realized finally that restraint was not a cage. It was a quiet power rising slowly, patiently, as he sat and simply allowed the world and himself to exist together in calm. He felt it before they even spoke. The subtle shift, the glance, the quiet weight of judgment that fell across the room. They did not understand. They could not see the stillness he had chosen, nor the effort it took to remain unmoved. To them, silence was strange, almost suspicious. They whispered in corners, their voices curling with assumptions he had not asked them to make. And he listened, not with irritation, not with anger, but with a gentle awareness of how easily others mistake restraint for weakness. It was curious, he thought, how the world often misunderstands what it cannot measure. They saw the lack of words and assumed absence. They saw the calm and assumed emptiness. And yet, within that quiet, there was a life as full as any spoken word. Did they notice? Perhaps not, and that was not for him to change. Could he allow them to misread him without being disturbed? Slowly, he began to see that he could. There was a strange loneliness in being misunderstood. Even when one sits in quiet strength, there is a weight, subtle but present, that presses like a shadow against the heart. He felt the gentle sting of misjudgment, the quiet burn of being seen incorrectly. It is not harsh, not cruel, but it is persistent, like a small wind that moves through a room, unseen yet deeply felt. And he noticed it, naming it inwardly, acknowledging it without letting it rule him. They tested, in small ways at first, words, glances, subtle challenges to break the calm. And sometimes he felt the old urges rise, the pull to answer, to explain, to defend. But he did not. He felt the impulse, studied it, traced it through the body, and let it drift away like leaves on a stream. How strange, he thought, that resisting the urge to react could be so demanding. How quietly powerful it could be to simply hold oneself steady while the world presses in. He observed them as though from a distance, and in that observation he felt a clarity that was new. He could not touch the stillness he had cultivated. They could not disturb the space he had carved within himself. Their misunderstanding was theirs to carry, just as his calm was his own. Did he feel sorrow for the distance between them? Perhaps. But it was a soft sorrow, not sharp, not bitter. Just the quiet awareness that some things could not be hurried, some perceptions could not be forced. It was in this quiet watching that he first began to understand the subtle power of being misread. If they could not see him clearly, that meant he was free from the weight of their expectations. Their assumptions could not shape him. Their judgments could not define him. And in this freedom, he felt a small surge of peace, delicate and steady, like sunlight spilling softly across a still pond. Sometimes, as he sat, he imagined what it would be like if they understood. Would it matter? He realized slowly that it would not. Understanding, when it comes from outside, is a gift, not a necessity. He could exist fully in himself, whether they comprehended his silence or not. And in that realization, a new calm settled over him. Misunderstanding, once heavy, became almost weightless, a small echo that could pass without leaving a mark. He noticed, too, the subtle way the world around him shifted when he did not react. The tension in the room softened, the edges of their voices dulled, and yet he did not claim this as victory. It was simply a reflection of the quiet strength he carried, the presence of restraint that moved slowly, unseen and steady. The power of stillness was not in proving anything, not in winning any contest of words, but in simply being fully, patiently, unwaveringly. And there was beauty in this, in the way he could sit, fully aware, fully present, while the world assumed he was absent. In the way he could breathe through the misunderstanding, feel it, and let it pass without clinging. There was a quiet dignity in being misread, a subtle proof that some things belong to oneself alone, beyond the reach of judgment or expectation. He did not feel anger. He did not feel the need to justify himself. He simply observed, and in observing, he became larger than the small measures others placed upon him. He could feel the strength of his own restraint, the gentle rise of self-respect, and the soft, enduring power that came from choosing to remain whole while being quietly misunderstood. In this, he found a rare and tender peace, one that no voice could disturb, no assumption could erode, and no misunderstanding could diminish. At last, he felt the quiet moment arrive, the one that seemed to come without warning, yet had been building slowly, like a tide that rises imperceptibly. Until the shore is touched, he realized almost gently that he did not need to speak, did not need to justify, did not need to bend to the expectations pressing softly against him. He could remain, fully present to himself, without seeking permission from the world outside. How simple it seemed in that moment, and yet how profound. He noticed the subtle shift in his own body as the decision settled within him. The tension that had lingered in his shoulders softened. His hands no longer twitched with the old urgency. Even the breath, once shallow with the need to act, flowed more evenly, calmly, as though the body itself understood the choice he had made. It was a small miracle, quiet and almost invisible, but it carried a weight far greater than any argument could have. He thought about the words that had been left unsaid, the replies that had never left his lips, the defenses he had restrained. Did he feel regret? No, not regret. A faint curiosity, perhaps, about what might have happened if he had acted differently, if he had answered their challenge. But that curiosity was soft, like a cloud drifting across the sky, not pressing, not demanding. He did not need to chase it. It was enough to observe, to notice, to let it exist, alongside the calm that had grown within him. And in that calm, he discovered something new, a kind of power that did not shout, that did not seek attention, that did not demand recognition. It was the power of presence, of knowing oneself fully and allowing the world to continue without feeling compelled to shape it. Could this be the truest strength? He felt it in his chest, a quiet pulse, steady and certain, gentle and enduring. He realized that power need not be loud to be real. There was a peace here he had not known before, not the kind that comes from avoiding difficulty or slipping quietly past conflict, but the kind that grows from choosing restraint with awareness, from embracing silence as a force, from honoring the space within oneself that belongs only to the heart and mind. How often had he rushed, had spoken too quickly, had been moved by the insistence of others, and now he felt a new rhythm, one of stillness and measured patience. He considered how strange it was that the world often confuses action with strength, noise with power, reaction with courage. Here, in this quiet, he understood that the truest courage was often invisible. It did not boast, did not prove, did not respond to the chatter that surrounds it. It simply existed, patient, steady, anchored in the self. Could he carry this courage forward? Could he allow it to guide him quietly, without needing acknowledgement? He felt the answer as a gentle certainty. Yes, the decision, simple as it was, seemed to ripple through him in ways he could not fully measure. Each heartbeat felt lighter, each breath more deliberate, each thought more aligned with a quiet purpose he had never sought to name. It was not about a way, inning or losing, about being right or misunderstood. It was about being whole, intact, undisturbed by the insistence of others, carrying an inner space that could not be reached without invitation. He sat and allowed himself to feel the fullness of this quiet choice. There was no triumph, no fanfare, no outward sign. Just the steady awareness of his own presence, a gentle reassurance that he was enough, simply by being. And in that enoughness, he felt the soft bloom of self-respect and unspoken dignity that did not need to be explained or defended. Could such simplicity hold more weight than the loudest words? He felt that it could. The world continued, of course moving in its own way, speaking, testing, assuming. But he remained, untouched in his stillness, aware of their presence, but not pulled into their noise. The soft, steady power he carried was not a barrier, but a calm river, flowing quietly beneath the surface, steadying him, guiding him, giving him the freedom to exist fully and simply. How strange, he thought, that such peace could be found not in action, but in deliberate pause, not in speaking, but in listening, not in asserting, but in allowing. And as the minutes stretched, he felt the decision settle deeper, like roots growing slowly into fertile earth. It was a quiet choice, yet it changed the way he occupied the world. Not with aggression, not with insistence, not with any need for recognition, just with a soft, enduring presence, a gentle strength, and a profound respect for himself that no one could take away. Here, at last, he felt calm. Here, at last, he felt quietly, steadily, and fully alive.